Hello and welcome to section 3. Smart tips on separation of concerns, testing and debugging. In this section we will talk about the separation of concerns and how we can implement this using Redux, as well as some testing and debugging tips. In this first video we will see Redux and a practical usage of it to implement separation of concerns in one of our components. First of all, let's see what Redux is. Redux is a state container library. Basically, it contains all of the logic of a component so that the component can be free to do only the UI. It allows for our component to just do UI drawing based on the current Redux state. Redux will give our component some props as input, and this will be the state of the component. Besides that, a component can trigger some actions in order to alter the Redux state. Besides these two things, there's no more logic in the component. All of the logic moves from the component to a Redux reducer. This way we can have a nice separation between the logic and the UI. Let's go ahead and look at the connect source code that Redux provides. This is the higher order component that connects Redux to React. And then we will transform our register form component to a register form duck. A duck is a structure that is very common when using Redux. Everything we need, we will see that when we start coding. Let's go ahead and look at the connect code. In the previous section we talked about higher order components. Here we have one, and it's called connect. The connect higher order component gets a couple of arguments that we will see what they do, and then with those as configuration takes the component that we want to give it. It will take that component and wrap it. The connect component looks more like this, the input button way 3. Using the connect component will be something like this. Like we said, connect gets 2 arguments and then our component. Let's go ahead and try to re-implement our register form component into a React and Redux component. First of all, we need to install Redux to our project. After this is done, let's go ahead and create a folder that will house our register form duck. Let's go ahead and copy our old component into our new folder. And we can rename it so we know which one is which. So if you remember, this component has a constructor with some state in it. It has a register function that takes our state and prints it out for us in the log. And last, it has a render function that creates the UI. Like we said in the introduction, using Redux, we basically move the logic away from the component. So let's go ahead and take all of the state and the logic of the register function and copy it over to a new file for using later. Now our component is already much simpler, having just a render function. Let's go ahead and import the connect function. After that, we will go all the way down and use our connect function. After that, we need to remove the export default from our original component. Let's go ahead and rename it also. And now we can go all the way to the bottom of the file and actually export default, our new wrapped component. We saw that connect gets 2 arguments. The first one is called map state to props. This first argument is a function that takes one argument that is state, which is the whole state of Redux. This function will return an object that will map on our props. In our component, we use full name, we use password, and we use username. Of course, we also have the log to show what we have in the state. Since state doesn't exist anymore in our component, we need to get it from the Redux state. And the Redux state maps its state to our props. It's a little bit confusing, but we will see it in action. Let's go ahead and change all of the state here into props. Great, and now that we have it, let's go ahead and import it from our Redux state. We don't have any Redux state for now, but we will create it. Now we can give this function as an argument to connect. Next up is a second argument. This one is called map dispatch to props. This one is a function again that takes as argument dispatch. This is a function that will call an action to our Redux state. Again, this one returns an object that will be mapped to our props for our component. This can be used to call an action for Redux. The action that we have in our component is basically register. When we tap the button register in our form, the function register should be called and it will generate our log. If we look at the input fields, we also have another action, which is this set state that we had before. Whenever a text in any of those input fields changes, we were updating our state. Again, since we don't have any state locally on the component anymore, we need to convert this into an action again. This action will cause the Redux state to change. Let's go ahead and add the props like we said. And now it's time to map the dispatch functions. Right now we don't have any Redux state or any actions, so let's go ahead and create this before continuing here. Let's create our initial state. We can reuse the code that we had from before, from the constructor. And this will be our initial state. Not in the component anymore, but now in Redux. Next thing we need to create is the actions. For our component, we need two actions. One was the update form, and the other one is register. Let's go ahead and create these. Each action is basically a function that gets some argument and then returns an object that has to have a type and a payload optionally. The type will be useful for our reducer to decide what to do, and the payload is any optional data that we need. Let's go and create our action types first. Since the name register form is common in both of them, let's extract it. Now that we have our action types, let's go ahead and create our actions. The register action, we'll have the register action type. And the update form will have the update form type. When we register, we don't need any extra data, so in this case we can actually go ahead and remove the payload. The update form will get an object. This object will describe what the change is, if it's the username, or if it's the full name, or if it's the password that is changed. In that case, our payload will be our just object. Now let's go back to the reducer and create the actual reducer that will do our logic. The reducer gets two arguments. One is the state, which will initialize with the initial state. And the second one is the action that should be taken. Having the state and the action, we can create the next state. If the action is a default action, so any unknown action, we can go ahead and just return the same state. If we register, we need to take our state and put it into the log. We had the code before, so let's go ahead and copy this. So when we register, we need to create our data. The data will be taken from our current state. And then instead of this set state, we will just create our new state and return it. Now let's go ahead and create the update form. This one is even simpler. We will return the state that we already have with one change. We will expand our payload. As we had in the action, the update form will get an object. This object will be our payload that we expand here and override our old state. Now what is this object that the update form will take? Let's go back to our component and see. First we need to import our actions. Now let's go down here again. The register, we'll call our register action. And the update form will take an object. And we'll call the update function using that object. Now the update form we show up here will be called whenever the onChange text happens. When the full name changes, for example, the text here will change. This will get called update form with this as the argument. And the argument is this object that we want, having the full name and the text. After we have finished with the map state to props and map dispatch to props, we give both of them as arguments to connect. This will create a new higher order component, and we can wrap our register form Redux component. Now that we have our duck, let's go ahead and create an index file that will export anything that's necessary. Now there's a little bit more setup for Redux to be able to be used here. First of all, in our root, we have to create a new file that we will call reducers. This file will be the root reducer for Redux. This means that all of the reducers that we have for every duck that we might have will be combined into one. Last part of our setup is we have to go to our app and we need to create a Redux store. This is where all the state of Redux is saved. Our app component will not be the default export anymore. This time we have to create a store like we said, giving it a root reducer as an argument. This new component will be our default export. The only difference here is that we need to wrap our app into a provider. The provider will make sure that we have our store and our Redux state and actions available in our app anywhere. The only change left is to actually use our component. Now that we have this done, let's go ahead and start our packager and see what we get. And we see that we are. Let's test if everything works. You can add a username, password, and some full name. And when we create the log, we see that everything is as we added it. In the next video, we will use React Native Debugger. We can see the whole state of Redux, so we will verify and see how this works. Some other useful libraries that you can look at is Redux Observable, Redux Saga, and Redux Thunk. They are all libraries that provide a nice way to use Redux side effects. That means that with each action, besides the reducer that will do some logic and work, we can also have some side effects, for example, fetch something from the network.